In today's lesson, we are going to talk about some of the basics of programming. Those of you that have learned other languages will find some of these topics a quick refresher, and for those of you that haven't learned languages before, you will get a quick intro to key vocabulary related to the organization of a program. So these are the different topics that we're going to talk about today. In general, how to solve problems, what Java is, the anatomy or layout of a program, and then the difference between comments, the rules for identifiers, reserved words, and what whitespace is in a program. All right, so in general, when we're using a program, we are trying to solve some kind of problem. And a lot of times people just want to jump right in and start coding. And in the beginning, that'll be just fine. But as we move through the course, we want to make sure that we break this up, that we first understand what we're trying to solve, then that we actually break it up into pieces, and we will typically use different methods or classes to break this up into pieces even better. We want to come with a solution, and then as we try our solution, if it doesn't quite work, we're going to need to refine it. Often cases you'll write code that won't work, you'll fix it, you'll rewrite it, and then we eventually get something that is ready to be tested, and then after errors have been fixed, it is good to go to solve your issues. A lot of times we'll see projects fail because a developer didn't really understand what exactly they were trying to solve. So we have to avoid assumptions and make sure that we understand exactly what we're supposed to be doing. And as our problem becomes larger, we need to break up our code into manageable pieces. And so like I mentioned, we will really be focusing on that throughout the year because we will get into quite large projects. And in order to help us with this, we use Java, which has an object-oriented approach. All right, so Java, this is a programming language, and there are many languages. And essentially, the language dictates how you write the code for the machine to understand it. There are a set of rules, and these rules essentially tell us the syntax to use so that the computer can understand what it is that we want to do. This language has been around since 1995, so it's been here for quite a while and has become quite popular. All right, oops, sorry about that. Okay, so in terms of our structure for a program, we are typically going to have several different pieces. First, we are going to have one or more classes, and a class is a Java file. Then within the class, there will be one or more methods. And if you've taken other programming classes, methods are the same thing as functions. And then you will have program statements, and each program statement will end with a semicolon. This is essentially the tasks that we want the computer to do. Within Java, we always have a main method, and the main method is what starts or runs the program. We also call this the driver program because it essentially runs the show. When we look at the layout of a Java program, there are several things that we will have there. First, we have the class header, and the class header always starts with the word public, then class to determine that you're creating a class, and then this right here is the name of the actual class you are creating. All of the code that we see inside of these curly braces is the class body. We can place comments just about anywhere within our code, and we'll talk about that more towards the end of the lesson. Okay, so within our class, we further break things up. We will have comments about the class before, and this will include our name always, name and period. And then within the method, or within the program, we will have methods. And before each method, we want to have comments about the method. And this right here is a method that we will see in every driver program we write. Later throughout the year, we will better understand the purpose of these words, but for right now, we essentially need to memorize public, static, void, main. This string args parameter is not required in BlueJ. However, for those of you that will start using Eclipse or have already started using Eclipse, it is required. Therefore, we just go ahead and have you put it in there always. It's best practice, and if you look at any resources online, pretty much all of them will use that as well. So just like how we said a minute ago, this first line is the class header because it describes the class. This line right here is the method header, and it describes the method. And the method header has a couple pieces to it. This part right here is the name of the method. And then the part that's inside parentheses are any parameters or variables the method is expecting. This word before the method name tells us what the method is returning. And we'll get more into detail about that in the coming days. Okay, so we talked about comments. When you're writing comments, these are essentially done in several ways. We can have inline documentation, which is where we have a comment where we just use this double slash, and essentially the comment goes until the end of the line. If your comment needs to be multiple lines long, then we use this format. And this format is going to go ahead and continue until you close the end of the comment. So this starts it, and this guy here ends it. They do not affect how a program works, and they are highly recommended and required to use to make our code easy to understand. All right, another word that we'll hear quite a bit is the word identifiers. And identifiers are the words that a programmer uses in a program. So what do we use words for? Well, we use them to name items. We're going to name our class. We're going to name our method. We are going to name variables and constants. All right, so we want to make sure that these identifiers are specific and help us understand what's going on. We don't want to just use identifier names like ABC, XYZ, because those are very vague. Now, in terms of when we name the identifier, there are specific rules that Java has. First of all, it can be made up of letters, digits, the underscore, and the $sign. Those are the only characters we are allowed. We also cannot begin with a digit. Now, in terms of case sensitivity, Java is case sensitive, and so all three of those names right there for total have different meaning. Now, right now, they kind of all probably look similar to you, and you're thinking, well, it's a matter of preference how we capitalize. However, that's not the case. Java has different case conventions. So essentially, we want to follow these rules. And the reason why it's important to follow these rules is then anybody can look at your Java program and they know that if they see the first letter is capitalized, they know that this is a class. And if they see that an identifier is all uppercase, they know that it's a constant. And then if something starts with a lowercase letter, they know that it's either a variable or a method name. Sometimes we get to choose the identifiers that we want to use. So this happens when we choose a variable name, method name, class name, etc. Other times we are using another programmer's code. And when we're using another programmer's code, an example of this would be if we use a Java supplied method, a Java supplied class, and in those cases we have to use the name as it's described in the class that we are using. An example of this that we saw the other day was println, and that is a method that's provided to allow us to print to the console. So when we use println, we have to use all lowercase, we have to spell it that way, we can't change it up. If we change it up, Java will not know what we are doing. There are other times when we're going to use special identifiers that are called reserved words. And these are words that have a predefined meaning in the language. A reserved word cannot be used any other way. All right. That word already has a specific meaning, and if you were to try to use it in a different way, the compiler would be confused. Now, on the next slide, I have a list of all of the Java reserved words. This is not something that you need to memorize. There are several words that you will never use, and there are other words that we will use quite a bit. So, for example, int and double. We'll use these all the time because these describe variables that we use. The word new and void, public, private, we will use these words all of the time. So some of these you'll get very familiar with. And then there's some others that you might never use. For example, I have never used the keyword synchronized. I don't even know what it's for. So don't worry about memorizing this. That is definitely not something that you need to do. If you are writing your code and all of a sudden a word changes colors, that's typically a sign that it is a reserved word. All right, last but not least is whitespace. Now, in Java, any spaces, blank lines, and tabs are what we call whitespace. And we use this to separate words and symbols. This is key. All white space is ignored. So the white space is for humans. The computer does not need white space, but it eases readability and makes a consistent indentation structure very, very helpful for proper formatting. So we will discuss in class the proper conventions in terms of spacing and tabbing and whatnot, and you will be expected to use similar styles within your programs. If you go out in the workforce, industry standards still expect you to use whitespace and tabbing. It just makes the code so much more readable. Just because you can do something without whitespace doesn't mean that that makes it better to use. All right, thank you and have a great day.